Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third meeting of the Data Privacy Protocol Alliance. My name is Gilbert Hill. I will get started with our schedule. Let me just share my screen here. Hopefully, you're all seeing this. As I mentioned, it's great to welcome all our members again. It's been a really busy year and we've got a really busy agenda. So without any further ado, we'll get stuck into it. First, we're going to have a welcome from Chantel White, who's MD at BigToken, our hosts. Then I'll do a quick member update followed by two presentations from Adam Tovim and Nick Potvin, who I should mention are both speaking in a personal capacity. After that, we'll take some questions on those topics raised and anything else from you, our members. And then finally, some next steps and heads up for the future. So over to you, Chantel.
Thank you for that, Gilbert. First and foremost, hello, everyone. I'm Chantel White, Managing Director with BigToken. I want to welcome you all to the third DPPA community meeting. We are so incredibly excited to have you all here with us today. Groups like the DPPA are reinforcing how valuable blockchain technology is and how it can be utilized to further power data and control tools. Now, part of a critical mission of the DPPA is to really act as a balance to ensure we're driving change and still enabling a fair and effective data ecosystem. Now, BigToken, of course, our overarching mission is to help usher in the future of what ethical data economies should look like. And as the DPPA continues to hit this incredible stride, we really have the opportunity as a collective group here today to rewrite the rules and practices of how data is collected, used, and sold. So with that, I'll pass the mic back over to Gilbert, who's going to kick off today's meeting.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chantel. And as Chantal mentioned, as many of you know, the DPPA was formed earlier this year, this spring, and I believe is a really unique community. And the reason I believe that is because it's the only place that brings together representatives from responsible marketing, data buyers, and the tech community in one sort of safe place to agree standards and ultimately technical platforms which will move us into the Web3 era. Obviously, as defined by Tim Berners-Lee, you had the first era, which was about connecting machines, the second era where we, or our attention and data, effectively became a product, and now the third era is where privacy is a key brand value, and that people, either individually or as groups or unions, can realize the value of their data in terms of a second income or donations to causes which mean something to them on a human scale. And talking of scale, those who know me know that I love to track the Lumascape, which is, I think we all know, it's a map of intermediaries between brands who want exposure to consumers, publishers, and the public on the receiving end. Now, this time I've gone one step further and I'm sharing the whole marketing technology landscape, the MarTech 5000. Now, this is a beast because it represents thousands of companies, all generating billions of dollars of revenues every year. And this is an economy which, to be honest, it's only starting to be effectively regulated and where the transactions are happening millions of times per second. And I think that it's fair that you can critique an overwhelming system like this while also being part of it without living in a cave or being labeled a hypocrite. And as these figures show, people do care about privacy in the context of ad tech, but they use different language. And this is something we'll come on to into the presentations in a moment, that they don't talk about, people in real life don't talk about this in terms of, demand side or supply side ad platforms. And they don't really know about any of these players in the MarTech 5000. But they do understand when something feels wrong to them. They are now aware that their data is being used. GDPR got the genie out of the bottle in that respect, and they're starting to exercise choice and, yes, walk away from companies which use data without their explicit permission. And smart brands get this. One example was IKEA, who now focuses everything that they do through the lens of data ethics and a privacy policy, which goes beyond compliance into customer service. And I was lucky enough to be part of a conversation last week, which was hosted by Big Token on the 4 pillars of trust, along with some senior executives from a publisher and an international branding agency. Now, we all agreed that when rebuilding trust, the key thing is stressing and reiterating this data deal, the value exchange, the why as well as the how in the use of personal data, which I think is at the core of these pillars. And it's this approach which flows into our collective voice at the DPPA as we grow our members from the data, the marketing tech, and the Web3 communities. And it's great to see increasing interest in the DPPA from the press and brands, some of whom are attending this meeting as observers, so welcome. And we're creating a unique voice in our industry, I believe, for a trade body which is starting to get noticed. But of course, we want the output of a DPPA to be practical, and it's a role of our committees and working groups to focus on case studies and solutions ultimately which meet the needs of data consumers across the spectrum of our members. And since our last meeting, we've started to form these, and our technical committee recently held its first meeting. Now we're going to be holding meetings for our community and governance committees next month, and the results are going to flow into our next community call. And as I mentioned, it's been great to see the impact that DPPA members are making and have them refer to us. Here's some quick examples. Last month, Permission.io's CEO, Charlie Silver, was talking about how DPPA is helping tip the balance of power in the crypto press. The Pool Data Foundation just launched their brand and website linked with their DPPA membership, and they're playing an active role in our committees. And the Swash Data Union just closed their $4 million initial funding round and utilized DPPA as a reference partner in their literature for that. And we've also been name-checked in white papers by the Omidyar Foundation. We mentioned at conferences in London, and we're actively seeking more opportunities. So if there's anyone else that you think we as a DPPA or you should be talking to, please let us know. And tell us also how we can support you with events, whether it's in real life or virtual, and amplify your reach and ours in our community and beyond. So for our main event, I want to focus on 2 members of our community from the marketing, the data, and the brand perspective. And first up is going to be Adam Tovim, who's a co-founder of Nth Party, one of the first DPPA members, and is an interim leader to companies across the commercial spectrum. And he's also professor of marketing at Brandeis Business School and an advisor to the Future of Privacy Forum, who, take it from me, literally wrote a book on a lot of the terms that we now recognize in our space. And he's going to share some of his research into how intimate data use can get and provoke some thoughts on where we go from here. So over to you, Adam.
Great, Gilbert, can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Excellent, just wanted to confirm. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Welcome everybody. I really just wanted to talk to you a little bit about some research I had been doing over the last year. I was compiling a lot of fantastic insights and other studies people had done, and just wanted to share some of it here because I think it speaks to why we're all part of DPPA. And just to set some context, I think we all agree DPPA is focused on a great path forward, users' control of their data, and really making sure that there's proper authentication of the usage of that data. And I think we all sit here, and if we were all, hopefully someday, we will all be able to gather in person and talk about why we're here, where we're going. And I think what would be lost is that where we stand on these issues depends on the fact that we're looking at some of the walled gardens, we're looking at a lot of data there. So the cliche of where you stand depends on where you sit. You know, where we are sitting today, I think there's a lot of opportunity to define an important path forward, but I want to highlight almost what we're not. I want to highlight a lot of the tectonic plates in the market And none of this is going to be revelatory to any of you, I assume and think. But I think just like the most recent Facebook Files articles that the Wall Street Journal did, a lot of great pundits sort of commented on it and said there was no one smoking gun that came out about that, not to pick on Facebook in particular, but it really did provide an extra level of color commentary. And that's what I just want to do today, where we sit today in terms of what is happening across particularly the digital media ecosystem in terms of centralized collection of our data as consumers, centralized processing, and a lot of times this is overlooked. And then, of course, everyone's very conscious of the centralized market power there. So just a little bit about me. What gets me up in the morning is really focusing on analytics-driven businesses. I love the power of predictive analytics, and self-taught program from the age of 10, but too much of an extrovert to be a computer science major. And so, I've always been fascinated by businesses that can take disparate data and produce better outcomes. And a lot of times there's sometimes I call it really, truly a wonderful but healthy tension between the proper and profitable use of personal data to produce those better outcomes. And then, of course, the reason why we're all here is I think we want to make sure that that's done properly. So as Gilbert mentioned, just so you know where I'm coming from in my portfolio life, that I live far too many hours throughout each week. But I serve as interim leadership through Chameleon Collective, usually doing a lot of interim CRO, CMO gigs. I've served as an expert witness in court testimony, and also very proud to be a co-founder of a DPPA founding member Nth Party. Gilbert, you mentioned Future Privacy Forum literally wrote the book. They've literally written a lot. We've literally written a lot of great works over the last 10 plus years. I think it's also worth mentioning, I was actually very fortunate to study under Alan Weston during my undergrad political science degree. And he literally did write the book called, I think the title was Digital Privacy. Fantastic trailblazer in our industry if you get a chance to read about him. And then, yes, I'm fortunate to focus a lot on the intersection of marketing analytics at Brandeis Business School in Waltham, Massachusetts. So listen, I'm going to go through these slides. I just want to take some snippets of some work I've done over the last year and give you some context. We all know that the walled gardens control roughly almost 70% of the ad tech market. I think it's just worth mentioning the next level down. And again, this is something we're all aware of, but when some of these companies make their moves and decisions, those impact standards across the industry. Just on a de facto basis, it certainly impacts best practices. The control over an operating system can also have huge ramifications for what businesses are doing with consumer data, with personal data, and especially across the digital media ecosystem. And, one of the things we talk about at DPPA is ultimately we want to make this data responsive, this personal data, usable in a responsible way, usable for advertisers. But advertisers, you talk to any marketer, they're ultimately looking to connect with an audience. And while there are some fantastically useful algorithms that some of the walled gardens have created, some of these large players have created algorithms that in a self-learning capacity can really find the right people at the right time for the right message. The challenge, marketers will tell you, is that they can't inspect any to the level of detail that they really want to inspect that data at. They can't measure at the level of granularity that they always want to be able to measure at. And so that's where the phrase "don't expect what you don't expect" comes from. But I think we should keep this in mind when we are talking about our governance and technical standards for how we're authenticating the use of the data, use of consumer data across the blockchain, for instance. Let's keep in mind that advertisers, marketers, they are looking for measurement. They're looking for data output that they can't get from when they're running a campaign with some of the largest players in the ad tech marketplace, in the ad tech market. And then finally, I just want to highlight a bit of an antitrust privacy paradox. We've got a small number of players. They're controlling 70% of the almost 70% of the ad tech market. So naturally, there is a tendency by those in the industry, by early developments on the regulatory front, to ask questions about antitrust, to openly seek input, to think about ways that clamp down is probably an overgeneralization, but ultimately antitrust is trying to make sure that you're not abusing that market power. But in the process of doing that, a lot of times when those restrictions are placed there, it comes at the same time that privacy regulators are coming in and saying, hey, you're sharing too much data, or you're using consumers' data without their consent. And because of the way we're set up in terms of our data privacy regimes, one large ad tech player that has the benefit of gathering lots of a consumer's digital footprint, digital exhaust, can ultimately just respond to some of those privacy concerns by clamping things down. But that only serves to heighten some of the antitrust challenges. So it does end up being a bit of a tension, almost even a paradox. As we're trying to care for privacy, we may be exacerbating some of the same issues that people are looking at from what will ultimately be, most assume, will ultimately be additional antitrust activity. So that's what we're thinking about in terms of the structure of the players and how advertisers and marketers see that. It's also worth mentioning from the consumer side, these large players own 9 of the top 10 mobile apps. And you can see here the type of reach they have as a percent of the US adult population. It's fairly significant, certainly amongst the top couple of mobile apps. But really, you have to go all the way down to slot number 10, to the Weather Channel, before you get to somebody that's independent there. And I mean, not necessarily independent, it's owned by IBM, but certainly not part of the large concentration of players that we were just talking about. And so I don't want you to I don't want to mislead anybody to say, hey, let's just pick on people that are big here. I think because a small number of players control such a huge amount of the market, it's just worth looking at what the incentives are there. There's one player in particular, upwards of 99% of the revenue comes from the advertiser. As we mentioned before, there's a privacy incentive for them to hold on to as much data as possible. But as I'm about to talk about in a minute, there's also an incentive from a machine learning perspective as well, and the value you can get from insights there. Centralized control, of course, prevents external accountability. And then there's also, a lot of server-side processing, and the derivative uses ends up limiting the amount of user control. Again, this is why we're here at DPPA, right? We want to give users more control. So that processing, it can produce very powerful predictions, but it also leads to concentration of power. So as Gilbert was mentioning, this term data intimacy, I think this is a fascinating term. I can't claim credit for it. Michael Kearns, University of Pennsylvania, looked into the amount of data processing power that a lot of these large players have, the incremental value that processed data delivers for advertisers, and then the vast scope of that data that's collected, but also the fact that the accuracy of these inferences goes far deeper than what may be collected on the surface. And so that's, the power of those derivative uses, the power to predict where you might be going. I mean, even just basic examples, if I spread a wide enough aperture across a consumer's digital exhaust, just the fact that they have, an interest in Ford F-150 pickup trucks, over-index in their consumption of US football content. I mean, this is ultimately going to lead to a conclusion that there's a much greater likelihood that that individual is a male, and I don't even need to have them declare that gender identity. So I want to talk just a little bit about what this data intimacy brings. And we'll distribute this. You can look at this later. But there was a separate study that set up, and again, not to pick on Google in particular, but Google controls a lot of different aspects of a consumer's digital journey. And so they set up a brand new Android phone with all the Google services running on. They wanted to just see how much can you get, how much data can you pick up here. And I think it was very interesting to see throughout the morning, see what somebody is doing across a variety of different Google services, and of course being able to track the geo exhaust, the geo path of the device. And then also in the afternoon, when a user is using Maps, when the user is using a wallet function in order to purchase some coffee and scheduling, and when you cross inside of a geofence that happens to be a pharmacy, and you spend a high dwell time there, that starts to stitch together a very rich canvas, really. I mean, if you think about a painter, you're creating this very rich canvas. And a lot of times people talk about the mosaic effect, right? There's just little bits of a mosaic, but ultimately you can piece together, especially from a privacy perspective, a greater likelihood that you could re-identify somebody. And then of course, in the evening, what one might be using a smart speaker at a home for, you might be booking travel. There's a lot of information that can be assembled. And again, we're not really singling out one individual company here and making value judgments about them as an actor. We really just want to shine a spotlight on the use of it. And so I'll just leave you with some final thoughts, is that this level of data intimacy, the stitching together this mosaic and using powerful inferences to predict who this person is and future actions they may take as a digital consumer, that's not something that can be measured just by raw bits crossing a pipe. It's ultimately when a lot of that is ingested and a vast amount of machine learning resources are put towards it, and other processing and other predictive exercises. That's really where you start to get this level of data intimacy. And a lot of the metrics we use today, both from a business and regulatory perspective, they really fail to account for the potential use of this. You can look back at some research, Gilbert mentioned Tim Berners-Lee earlier. Tim, I had the very good fortune of working with Tim and Danny Weitzner and Hal Abelson up at MIT and co-founding a company with all of them where they were talking about information accountability. And it was really about the potential uses for this data and a way of bringing some accountability to that, almost like a programmatic API for data governance. And then, of course, high volume data sources are places we typically look for. We look at big fat pipes going into a consumer's home, but more and more those are fragmented across multiple actors, and they tend to be encrypted, not just by HTTPS, but more and more over VPN, especially due to our remote working and COVID these days. So it reveals very little about the end users. There's a lot more we should be caring about. Here, it's more about the lower volume specialized data sources. I can't imagine how far over I've gone so far, so I'm going to stop here and pass the baton back. So thank you for your patience. That was far too long.
That's great. Thanks, Adam. That was fantastic. And we'll have some. I'm sure we'll have some questions in a moment. So we'll round up all the questions after we've had a chance to hear from Nick Potvin. And he's a senior manager of ad product and technology at PGA Tour, which is a non-profit organization, which, as we all know, has grown to be one of the biggest brands in golf since it was founded almost 100 years ago. And we were just saying before the call started, but Nick's got one of those roles that I'm seeing more and more frequently, where he serves to ensure compliance, but with a business focus, where, just like we're talking about with IKEA, privacy and respect for data is a key performance indicator, a KPI. And I've also recently discovered just how musical he is, having studied and worked as a film score composer. So other than that, Nick's going to share some insights from blending first-party and data and partner data in a compliant and ethical way. So over to you.
Excellent. Thank you for that introduction. So yeah, I'm just going to go through a couple of slides and talk through sort of how we're approaching it at the tour. We've had a couple of use cases recently that's pretty interesting. But first, I just want to just talk through my background and my role. Gilbert kind of alluded to it, but essentially, I sit in a dual report role across revenue operations and legal. So my day-to-day function is looking at data collection from a perspective of our audience, what's happening when individuals are at the events, how they're interacting with our brand and digital properties, and then also how our audiences overlap with our partners, whether a title sponsor, an OMP, or an endemic. So my responsibilities is really everything from driving the compliance program, documenting policies, procedures, working with data subject requests, but then also looking at the audience strategy. So how do we activate on the data? How do we collect the data? And then also, just the technology changes with IDFA not being available, cookieless future, all of these topics that are coming up. How do we solve for those technical challenges? And then just put some letters up to my credentials, certified CIPPE and CIPPT, and also One Trust Fellow. So what we're going to dive into is kind of what Adam was alluding to, in the sense that the programmatic space and buying media via a DSP or an SSP can get you some obviously high quality insights. There's some strong predictions that can be made, but how individuals are interacting with brands is sort of a very different contextual relationship. So our partners they come with a very use case. Some have hyper targeted lists of individuals that they're looking to speak to at a given time, whether it's at an event or when they come to a web property. And they're also looking, just the same as we are, is to sort of, enhance our base. We want to grow our audience. We want to get the game of golf into, as many homes as possible, get people introduced. Especially in COVID, we were the first sport back, and so that was it's been really interesting to see kind of how the sport has evolved over the past couple of years. And as Gilbert said, I've been fortunate enough to be in a position where I've had support from leadership to really implement a privacy by design approach with this. There is a little bit of a could be a conflict between monetization and revenue and privacy, but I do see a world where they can coexist. And so the way we approach it is the first stage is we get a campaign concept, and this can come either from our side or from a partner side. We sort of talk through what the partner's looking to achieve, what we're looking to achieve, and then the next step goes right into the privacy controls. So we at that point we'll talk through things like data sharing provisions and how the agreements should be structured and who owns what data, what role each is playing, the security mechanisms around that. And then it goes into the data strategy, right? So this is the technology that we're going to use, but it's also how we're going to interface with the consumer. We want to make sure that we're doing things in the appropriate way, compliant with the regulations, but almost more importantly, we also want to make sure that we're being transparent and fair, and there's no sort of funny business of where the data is going. It's a clear interaction with both brands. And then it goes to the live stage where the campaigns get run, and this it can run from any different. Sometimes we have a form or a survey or a unique experience within our platform. Sometimes it's media buys that drive to a different site, but essentially there's multiple touch points. It can be either an individual at the event, like I mentioned, or just scrolling through social media and getting a dark post that then pushes back. But there's these multiple touch points that we then need to consolidate across the two data sets. So our approach and sort of the things that we check for is leveraging de-identified segments wherever possible. So if we can avoid PII, and that's not objective, then we try to leverage that as much as possible to try to create a little bit of a buffer. The data sharing agreements is obviously a big one. Everyone sort of wants the collection of the data and responsibility, but with that comes the responsibilities. And so we go through each one on a very granular basis and make sure that the right roles and responsibilities are in place, that the right security measures are in place. And then, as I mentioned, the co-branded collection. And to me, that's the key point, is making sure that when that data is collected, whether it's personal information from the perspective of just a pseudonymized identifier or it is actual PII, that there is the appropriate consents, there's the appropriate disclosures, and it is very clear that the individual is interacting with both us and the partner. And that way the data, and it's in the long run that we may be restricting some data that we collect, but we're getting higher quality of data. And what we're seeing is that the advertisers and the partners are valuing that more unique, targeted, and fully transparent data set, and which is somewhat of what Adam was alluding to. We're doing second party matching, so looking at if our partner has data and we have data, trying to see where the overlap is or where the disconnect is, where we can provide additional value to each other or append records. And then obviously the GDPR CCPA considerations. We primarily play in the CCPA space just by nature of where we are. However, we take GDPR as the gold standard. So pretty much everything we do, we come at it from a GDPR lens, regardless of if it's jurisdictionally required. And what we're seeing is some really interesting results. With the first few passes of these, we're seeing higher response rates on brand lift studies when there is a co-branded experience. We're also seeing a 5% lift in brand awareness. So this is on what we're seeing from both our side and the partner side is when there's this co-branded experience and there's this transparency between both us and the partners, we're actually seeing a lift in understanding that relationship. But the statistic that I think is most fascinating is when a person is familiar with the brand association and they're familiar with this form and this experience, they're 40% more likely to know the partner services and products. And I think that's huge, is understanding that when there are these co-branded experiences, when there is the trust of, okay, I'm interacting with both these brands, I'm providing my data, that they're not only that they're taking it a step further to do further research into either us or our partners to really understand, if there's an event coming up near them, or if there's a if there's a service or a product that the partner can provide for them. So we're definitely seeing that as using privacy by design isn't going to restrict the data flow, isn't going to restrict how much data can be collected and used for business purposes, but you're doing it in a way that's transparent in the individual, and you're getting a lift from both sides.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for that, Nick. I mean, we've got a couple of questions, and I wanted to just jump in straight. Actually, we've got a question from an audience member, so let's do that. I've got one that I'm burning to ask you, but I'll come to that. My one's very nerdy. This one looks. So there's a question: playing devil's advocate, effective decentralization requires a big walled garden players to relinquish control. What are the incentives that are going to be sufficient for them to do that voluntarily, or is their cooperation not needed? So. Who wants to take that? Nick, did you want to take that, or Adam, or both of you? That's a big question.
That is a big question.
How do we bring them along?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, I mean, I do think the cooperation is needed. I mean, the approach we take is that it's an interaction with the brands. It's not passive collection; it's active collection. So I do think that cooperation is needed. I mean, we have the advantage, right, of that we're very niche and in the sense that people that are interested in golf are going to come to the PGA Tour. They're going to and we want to make sure that brand trust is there. So I mean, for us, and the walled gardens are there's a lot that they're doing that are not privacy conscious, but I am seeing some changes in terms of how data pipes can be leveraged across the big players where we can't have a direct relationship with us and the partner. So yes, there's definitely some relinquish of control. I totally agree with that, but I am seeing some evidence that the service, putting them more in a service provider perspective, we may see that trend continuing.
I think that segues into my question, which was about you mentioned data sharing agreements, and obviously you've talked about that, the unique insights that being open about brand partnerships and how you're going to use data and making that clear can create these unique insights. And I know that we've talked in the past about clean data clean rooms. Can you tell us a bit more about that, and how can they help us avoid this inexorable process towards centralization as a kind of the alternative to flocks?
Yeah, 100%. And that's and a lot of the case studies that I'm talking about, we're leveraging clean rooms. So yeah, 100%. I mean, one of the biggest challenges with this is the security of the data portability, right? And that's where, for me, that's where clean rooms come in. Is you can have everything structured properly, but then making sure that data is accessible to both parties after the fact, in a secure way. So to me, that's where the data clean rooms can really kind of help level the playing field. Is that there's not an intermediary. We are in control of that service system, but we don't have to build the stack from the ground up.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Nick and Gilbert. I think these analytic clean rooms have been around for a while. They've been very manual in nature, but the rapid evolution of a lot of privacy enhancing technologies has really made it so really powerful. You almost don't need the clean room as a construct. You can just secure the data. And in fact, I've been pointing out some of the potential issues and concerns with some of the large players, but it's worth mentioning in August, Facebook publicly announced that they're deploying secure multi-party computation for exactly this type of exercise. So who knows where they're going to take that. And maybe they won't relinquish control to the previous question, or maybe they'll use that as a privacy safe way to extend some of this. But I think, I've been fortunate to work with some great, folks who are using privacy enhancing technologies. Actually, as Party's own Andre Lapitz, my co-founder there, presented to the Future of Privacy Forum about these types of technologies. So Gilbert, I think those are great ways for the data to be used. Doesn't ultimately address everything that we're focusing on here with DPPA, but it's a fantastic part of the skeletal framework.
I think that's a really good point. And, one of the big things that we want to do with DPPA, just like Nick was talking about, getting the stakeholders and assessing what you want to do and what the risks are with a planned joint marketing activity is actually, before we dive into building tech, it's about agreeing standards. And I think what really struck me in your talk, Adam, was, ads and search are very different things, and we react to them very differently. But they've all been centralized in like this handful of players, or maybe one player. And a lot of the things that they're trying to do around increasing privacy are directly in contravention of the movement towards greater antitrust activity. I mean, do we do we need to treat different types of ads differently? And have different definitions and standards, just like we have very specific requirements around healthcare and financial services. And from from the academic side of your experience, are there frameworks that we can adopt for these?
Adopt for these specifically with the use of the data?
Yeah, I think the use, and also the communicating that to the consumer. Because again, we seem to be moving out of this compliance phase into more of a bringing them along. And again, I'm mindful of the time, some of the questions are really excellent about, how do we move from, copy-based data? But we'll get to that in a second. But, we're seeing brands borrow ethical frameworks, and they're pretty high level. They're like, kind of do no wrong. Is there a way that we can get more granular with this?
Well, we can. And if you look at I think it's TCF 2.0, what the IAB has been putting out there. It's an attempt to create a whole taxonomy that the consumer could understand. I know at FPF for a long time we've been looking into and sort of trying to advance use of iconography. Because if you think about it, so much of our consumer attention has moved over to these smartphone devices. It's much less real estate for the user experience, much less real estate to provide notice and allow for a clear consent. And then what does that really mean? You're saying, hey, don't use it in this particular situation, but what happens to preserving the provenance of downstream uses or misuses of the data? That's a big issue as well. So there's still a lot to be solved there.
Definitely. And we've got a question about another specific question about clean rooms for you, Nick, which is, do you see a distinction between NPC clean rooms and true clean rooms, and the types of talents that can use each?
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly running into similar challenges, right, of understanding which partners we can really do these case studies with. We're still very much in the early stages, so I don't know that I can point to a specific distinction between the two, but I will say that we're running into a similar challenge where there's only so many partners that have the capabilities to really leverage the clean rooms. And similarly on our side, right? I mean, it's a new space for us that we're exploring. So, I don't have a great answer to that question, except for that I can echo the challenge. It's new technology that we're still navigating.
It is, and I think the talent thing is a real challenge, right? I mean, these technologies are still very early days. Some are getting a lot of funding and just educating, raising awareness in the market, and making it easier to use, but then also sometimes it's not quite so secure. And when you really need to go secure, you sometimes have to have even just sort of an understanding of how to make the right decisions about which one to use is a tough exercise. You need the right talent inside the company for that. And then of course, actually putting it to use and making the most of it.
I think that's a good point. And when I was diving into sort of the topic of clean rooms myself, I realized that we weren't actually that far away from a point when they were a physical thing, that there was actually a clean room where you would put documents in. So it's very much on an evolution. And again, that to me, as someone who got into privacy a few years ago, kind of by mistake through my role running a London digital agency, and then got into the whole Web3 space and crypto, is that obviously one of the appeals of Web3 tech is that it does show promise and allow for decentralization and disintermediation. One of the goals of DPPA is to be owned by our members rather than a central organization. Obviously now, with Web3, I can start to deal direct with my data and exercise more control. How do we start to educate, partners and ad tech players about this, as an opportunity, not a threat? Because obviously, Nick, that's something you're got a delicate role there, that you've got compliance. You're telling ultimately you have a power to say no to something, but you want to drive a business future forward. So how do we embrace the Web3 aspect of things?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I do think that the partners that we work with on the technology side, I think with the big tech changes that are happening, IDFA going away, cookieless future, et cetera, like I do find the traditional SSPs, DSPs open to conversations, and I do find that when I come to the room with some ideas around, we've had conversations about flocks and how we as a publisher can leverage them as opposed to a DSP leveraging them. They're fruitful conversations. So I think it's a problem that everyone's looking to solve. But I don't know that not everybody is that same way. There's certainly partners we speak to that are just, this is the service we provide, this is what we're building, we're wanting to be centralized, and there's not really much of an opportunity to explore options. So
I think that's a fair point. What I would counter with that is that I am seeing a lot of it, and maybe it's because of the spread of the socialization of a lot of these concepts of things like DeFi, or it's a data dividend movement and things like that, or data unions over here in Europe, that I'm getting asked about this more and more in a way that was kind of inconceivable 18 months ago. So I think you're right. There's a long way to go towards decentralization, but we are on that road. And again, that's very much where we position ourselves at DPPA as a place where we can explore these. And this actually mirrors what's happening with some of the regulators, like the ICO in the UK is expanding its sandbox away from kind of compliance data transfer solutions, much more to how do you actually create an ethical AI framework? How do you create real transparency and effective consent, which is some of these much more mature questions that we're hopefully leading the way on. I'm really mindful of time. I just want to quickly share my screen with next steps. Thanks to everyone for the questions. We will be answering the ones we couldn't answer on the call today. In terms of next steps, we're going to continue to finalize our committees and share outputs. Our focus has been on the technical committees, and we're going to be outputting our next steps from the original blockchain proposal. And as ever, please, we'd love to talk with all our members and highlight your wins via socials. And there's our Slack channel, which is closed channel to all our members. And we also have our email news shots, so you can keep in touch with us that way as well. So I just want to thank Nick and Adam, and thank Big Token for hosting us, and thank all of you for joining us today. And we'll see you very soon.